Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Lisa Neller, host of My Golden Life. And today we are going to talk about finding your voice and using your voice in the context of moving through midlife. Now, we all have a story, and today's guest has her own unique story, which she's going to share. And there are a couple things that we have in common. We're both yoga teachers. And we both guide women in midlife to live with purpose, passion, and positivity in mind, body, and spirit. Those things are important to both of us. And we have Andrea with us, who is a writer, an indie author, and poet. And her pen name is Shydrea. And instead of giving you her bio, I'm going to let her share her story and how she came to be using her voice in the area of writing and speaking. And she's also going to be reading some of her poetry, which I'm really excited about. So Andrea, welcome to My Golden Life. I'm so glad that you're here to share your story.
Hi, Lisa. I just realized I don't have my book next to me, so I do need to grab that at some point.
Okay.
So yeah, that's great. I don't know why I forgot it. Uh, yeah, so where should I start?
Okay.
Let
So
me.
first I want to have you reiterate what it is you're doing now and
Yeah,
and how you are in service to the world right now. And then we'll go back and we'll go through some of
yeah,
your background and all of that.
that's perfect. Thank you. So right now in my life, I'm 53. I always can't remember how old I am. I am a full-time writer, poet, and artist. So, and I am also speaking a lot, doing a lot of public speaking, and in order to liberate my voice, and then also be an example, a vulnerable example to others who would like to liberate their voice. And so I'm just, carving a path, being a trailblazer, if you will. There's a lot of women speaking, but there's not enough women speaking. And so, talking about my journey and, how that's applicable in wherever I speak. So, yeah.
Awesome. Okay. I love the word liberate. Moksha in Sanskrit means liberation, right? And yoga, it's like the freedom is such a big thing.
Yeah.
When we do the right, when we employ the right practices and do the things that are
Mhm.
most helpful. So I love that idea of liberation. So thank you for sharing that. All right. Excuse me. Based on what you have told me previously, you have a pretty driven and accomplished background in my mind in your work in your career, before and during motherhood. So let's start there, and
Mhm.
then you can talk about your pivot, you know, in
Oh, good.
midlife
Yeah.
that led you to where you are now. So
Yeah.
background first, and then we'll move into the pivot.
Yeah. So in order to go, when you get to a certain age, you realize I need to create a timeline or this is going to turn into a memoir. And so, yeah. So if I can kind of take a moment or two to kind of give a timeline of, um, childhood, that's something I don't want to reflect on, but it was very, gave me a lot of street smarts. So that we'll just skip over that section. And then I put myself through college and got a degree in sports medicine and did all the, I worked 3 jobs and I didn't have any family support during that. That to me is an accomplishment. Financial, physical, emotional support, none of it. Put myself through college with 3 jobs and then was in that health and fitness industry in the beginning. So, and what they called it back then isn't what they call it now, but I have my degree and a large handful of many certifications that go along with that, like health coaching and exercise recovery and um, all the things, nutrition and all the things. Got married to my middle school boyfriend who we didn't see each other over a 10-year gap. So we reconnected later. That's an accomplishment.
And
And
that's
then,
kind of fun. I'm just going to interject here that I met my husband playing spin the bottle in seventh grade. So
Oh, nice. Oh
and we
yeah, okay.
reconnected later. So okay, go ahead.
I'm thinking of the spin the bottle episode on Friends. That's a whole nother story. I don't know if you saw that one.
I'm pretty sure I did,
Yes,
but I'm going to go back and watch it again.
right. And there was a lot of complications with that marriage because there was a lot of religion that played in part, in which we won't talk about today either. But that's an accomplishment. And then I became a mother, and I started painting plaster molds, pouring and creating plaster molds and painting with the Alzheimer's patients in the hospitals and at nursing homes while I was pregnant. And I also then took my newborn son with me. That wasn't lucrative. It was beneficial, but and that's an experience for another time. But then I ended up getting into real estate and had an 8-year career as a real estate agent and broker. And I was very successful as that at that as well. But I lost 2 babies in the process. And one I was in, midterm in one of them and almost lost my daughter because it was a 7-day a week on call, very rigorous career. And decided I had what I would call a quarter life crisis or clarity moment, which wasn't a moment. It took 2 years. And long story short, packed up my kids and my husband, and we moved across the country. That was a 2-year process, and dedicated my life at that time, to becoming a full-time mom and wife and all the things that come along with that. Because that type of a career wasn't serving my core passion of being an on present a present on purpose mom to my children, right? And so that period of my life was in my 30s. I did a whole lot of things during that, as we mothers do, but I poured myself into 8 years of tennis, learning, teaching, coaching, becoming a USTA junior tennis coordinator, team tennis, got my kids involved. And I think my sports medicine and stuff background was coming in there. I took metalworking classes at the Fine Arts Center, learned how to make jewelry, teach jewelry at the local Joann's, and then do shows. And all the while, I'm still being a mother, cooking, cleaning, and all the things that you do, taking them to all their stuff. And I had a supportive husband, and that's not the background that I came from. So there was such a gift in that. And then started an Etsy store and built a 500 team member supporting artist team on Etsy, and then drove my daughter to all of her sporting events and my son and all the things. But here's where it's getting interesting, is that somewhere, and I think a lot of women probably can relate to this. I know everyone's story is not the same. Some women have full-time careers all their life. And so I don't want to assume that anyone's story is the same, but something was happening inside of me at that time as I was getting closer to feeling like I was getting closer to the end of that chapter, I guess I should say. My son had moved out, then moved back in. My daughter's in high school. My husband and I were not getting along. The fights were just repetitive. There were a lot of patterns. And I was feeling a lot of pain. And I had depression during my whole marriage. I just never realized it. It would come in waves. And I also skipped over the part where I drugged myself into a yoga studio at age 39 and ended up, because of the depression, I wasn't sure I was going to make it through that wave, and ended up, becoming a triple certified yoga teacher and teaching yoga. And so I just, a lot of stuff that had been festering or bypassed was coming to the surface as I was getting to the end of this chapter. And I would assume that that's very common for women, but I can only reflect on it now and just say that there was a lot of unhealed wounds from life, from childhood, from my 20s, my 30s, my marriage, and my relationships that weren't dealt with properly. and they were coming to the surface, and you can't control it, not any more than you can control an illness. If you have an underlying physical illness and you don't know it's there, it's going to come up at some point. And it was surfacing, but it took a good 5 6 years. And then in the empty nest stage, which also happened at the same time as the pandemic, we moved out right before the shutdown. I was teaching yoga. I had to shut down my studio, and I started writing. And that writing process pulled me into a really dark place, which I understand it did for a lot of people as well. And I was forced to face, the previous 50 years of my life as I started writing, and really look at my life and examine things. And it got ugly for a long time. And so, and my relationship with my husband was on the hot seat. We're great now. We're doing better than we ever have. But so there was a lot of work that had to be done at that point. So yeah, that's how I became a writer.
Yeah, I mean, what a varied background. I absolutely love it. I mean, I'm imagining that no matter who you meet in the world, you could have an interesting conversation based on all the experiences you've had and all the knowledge you have. And and I do admire that. I really do. I love it when people have this wide range of experiences that they can draw from.
Mhm.
And I guess my question would be now, like, when this, I don't know if you call it a revelation or epiphany, or when these feelings started coming up, did they manifest as panic attacks, or like, how did you begin to notice that you were remembering your past and that it was haunting you and creating
I
pain for
didn't. I
you?
didn't even know what was happening to me, actually. It was very scary because I had waves of depression during my life, that were also kind of scary, but I usually just exercised and hustled my way out of it, which I think is what society does. I mean, if you look around, our society is suffering, and I believe that a lot of the suffering is emotional suffering. And in order to not deal with what we're feeling on the inside, we distract ourselves. We distract ourselves with work. And I'm not speaking for myself, but I'll integrate whatever I think people might be distracting themselves with, but work, TV, hustling, signing on to the next thing, going to sporting events, concerts, drinking, smoking. But, those are just numbing mechanisms. But I'm talking about distractions. And our society supports that. There's always something to do that you can go do. And so the pandemic really forced people to slow down. And I think a lot of people really just sort of woke up. And I don't mean, I'm not talking woke culture stuff. I'm talking just woke up, like, to the fact that they weren't liking the way things were going. But yeah, so I'm only really starting to be able to put language to what happened to me now. Still, I'm still putting the language to it. But there's a lot of, as I have these conversations, I did a lot of learning. I followed at least 5 or 6 psychologists. I Because of my health background, I stayed healthy as I could. I did lose a lot of muscle. There was a lot of grief in that process. I didn't even know I was grieving. Uh, I was grieving things. And so I continue to exercise, walking. Um, yeah, I'm kind of losing my mindset here. Yeah, or my
No,
thought process.
it's fine, because I think you had a really good sense of self-care while you were going through that period, and you're still going through it, but you're mindful of the self-care piece, which because you have all that knowledge, you know, you're going to be mindful of it. You can't just, like, that's just part of you, you know. It's like,
The
oh, I
yoga,
wanted to.
the yoga really played a part in that. Like, I was super grateful for my yoga teaching because I learned as much, if not more, in teaching yoga. I was a restorative yoga teacher. And I immediately defaulted to that, and then my health and fitness and nutrition background while I was going through this dark night of the soul, existential crisis, unraveling of who I am, and all these things that happens in midlife if you are, as you said, I knew something was happening and I needed to honor it. And I was honoring it was the hard part because it was so painful that I did want to not feel it, but I couldn't help it. It was like a tsunami. I couldn't control it. It was,
Yeah.
I tell people it's like this tsunami's coming and you can't sweep it back into the ocean. It's coming and it took over me.
Yeah. So, do you still want to go grab your book? Where's your book?
Oh
Is it
yeah,
close?
it's right over here. I'll be right
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. And while you're doing that, I'll keep talking. And I taught restorative yoga also for a long period of time. And it was one of those classes that the people who experienced restorative yoga loved it so much that they kept coming back over and over and again because it's so healing and it's so relaxing, and particularly for high strung people, it's hard to relax, right? It's hard for people to calm down. And so if they can get to a class, it can be really healing, for your central nervous system. And I don't have to tell you, I'm telling the audience,
Yeah, for
go
sure.
do that. If you can, if you're suffering with an illness, or you're suffering from anxiety, or you're having panic attacks or whatever, get to a restorative yoga class and calm down your central nervous system so you have an opportunity to heal.
A
Now,
depression or anything like that. You know, what's
yeah,
interesting is when I went through my training, I did simultaneously did Kundalini training and a Hatha Ayurveda training. And I really was interested in the physical aspect, that Hatha training, because I was a physical person. But the
yeah.
Kundalini called to me, the meditation and the the mantras and things like that. But
Excuse me.
I as you know, when you graduate from your yoga trainings and you're trying to figure out what you want to teach, you have to experiment with all the different yoga practices, and there's so many different types and styles, and I realized I needed the restorative yoga. I
Yeah.
couldn't sit still. And so I started teaching it because that's what I needed the most. And then I became addicted to it. I was like, I just want to lay here for the rest of my life.
I get it. So
Yeah.
have you taught yoga nidra as well? Is that part of your restorative, or
No, what I ended up doing, it was interesting, is I created my own style of teaching. And so I sort of I weaved in my sports medicine background. So I talked a lot about anatomy in my classes, and I talked a lot about the benefits of the poses, anatomically and physiologically. And then I weaved in self massage, aromatherapy. I also weaved in the Kundalini practice that I'd learned with the breath work. And so it was a hybrid, and it was a very popular class. It was on a wait list, and it was great. And then
wow.
yeah,
I love that. Yeah, most people don't even know what their organs look like or anything. They don't know anything about their muscles or their anything internally. All they see is
yeah,
the outside, right? So to
yeah.
have someone like you who can point to some of that stuff, it can be eye-opening for people. So let's talk about finding your voice, because before you can use your voice, you have to find your voice. And I'm guessing you found it through writing. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so when I started writing, it was innocently to just start telling my story, because once we moved out of our house, we sold our house, and this was before the pandemic. I was like, I need to get back into the workplace. My daughter had just left. She wasn't gone for long because the shutdown was happening shortly after. And I started to interview for all these jobs in these fields that I was qualified for, more than qualified. And the door was being shut on me constantly. And that was very eye-opening for me, because I was more than qualified than the people that were interviewing me by far, but I couldn't get into the workplace. And I won't go into the why I believe that was happening, but like I said, it was eye-opening, and it was a little soul crushing too. Uh, you know, for so many reasons, knowing what you have to offer and your knowledge, and then and then just feeling like because you chose to stay at home, you no longer add value to the world. And it was just shocking. It's still shocking just saying it out loud, right? And I know a lot of women experience that. And then sometimes we're forced to go back to college, and I was looking at that and it just didn't make sense. So, um, I decided to start writing. I was taking more courses. I'm a chronic learner. I'm always enrolling in something and learning about something. And I was writing about my life just to try to put together a story about my life so that I could sell myself, if you will, for marketability for a job. And then that tsunami showed up. The tsunami showed up. So I didn't go looking for it. I didn't even want it. It wasn't something, but it came up, and it was my inner child. That's how I explain it in to some people, because my book is called Savage Poetry for Inner Child Healing. It's called A Poet's Playground, but and and my inner child came out and just started talking. And so I'm writing and writing and writing, and I don't even understand what's happening to me. And then I had to extract my writing into poems just to even have it be palatable to myself. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah. So you found your voice in writing and you're using your voice in both writing and speaking, because now you are offering yourself as a guest on podcasts. And I know that you're making a difference in the lives of other women. So I guess what I want to do is give women hope in the second half of life, that if they haven't found their voice, there's different ways of doing it, and yours happen to be writing, processing, self-care. I love that piece of it, and I hope that
Self-compassion.
self-compassion, that's huge. Yeah, you got to be your own best friend.
Mhm.
So
And I think that's what my book does too, because there's a lot of chapters, and it's a fast read. It's got really large print, fast read. Everybody who's read it, it's made such a huge impact on that they've messaged me, sent me reviews, and told me that they've read it twice. Everyone has read it twice. That's how easy it is to read. But there's a lot of inner child healing stuff in here. But like my chapters are about faith deconstruction, inner child healing, letters to my mother, father, and then there's a whole section on women. And that's where the empowerment piece and the liberation piece starts to come in, because I was really looking at myself as a woman, and the things that had affected me and the choices that I had made in my life, and how that affected me as a mother and as a young woman, as a married woman, as a daughter, as a mother, as a friend, as society expected me to be, and then just turned that into poetry after I faced the wounding of things. And I think that's really had an impact on the women who've read it, because they send me messages all the time, and their messages are so amazing that I almost start crying every time, because I'm like, oh my gosh.
I
They're like,
know.
I feel like you feel. I felt that way. So I put words to what people and women feel, even though I've had some men message me too, but what women feel, but they have never put the words to what they feel and they carry with them as they go through life.
Yeah. I know some women who are my age, and I'm in my 60s, who are still struggling, and also some younger people. So it's all over the place, right? Women
Mhm.
all over the map
Mhm.
are having these experiences. So we talked briefly before our interview here. We talked briefly about therapy, not therapy. What should you do if you're
Yeah.
starting to experience this dark night of the soul kind of a thing? What would you say about that? I mean, I'm a big fan of therapy, and also coaching, because I'm a coach. But as a coach, I don't take people back and help them process their trauma. That's not what I do, but my daughter does, for example. So
Mhm.
anything to say about that?
Yeah, and since I didn't know anything about the therapy world, and honestly, it's like anything, you need, if you go out to find a realtor or an insurance agent or an attorney or a banker or whatever, you need to take the time to find someone that you can trust, right? And so I never did that with therapy. But now that I realize that this dark night of the soul experience, existential crisis, this unraveling, there's so many names for it. Some people call it midlife crisis. I call it midlife clarity. um, is it can be so painful. And so what happens, and I'd love to I wish your daughter was here so she could tell us what this is called, but I'm just going to call it a trauma regression, where you're examining things and all of this stuff from the past comes up, and it's almost as if, or it is as if, you are experiencing it all over again. And that's what was happening to me. And I didn't know it. Now I know, because I've spent the last 4 or 5 years um, pouring myself into the psychology and therapy world as a student, not at a not as a college, but we have so many resources available to us now on online podcasts. Your daughter's podcast is amazing, which I just found the other day. And I now can speak that language. I could probably sit around a group of therapists and I know exactly what they're talking about, attachment wounds and trauma regression and ruptures and big T and little t traumas and all that stuff. And so it's very important. And if I had known what I know now, I would have definitely found someone. I don't know how I would have, but and had them nurture me through that process. But I had to nurture myself through that process. And I did that by educating myself while I was in pain. So I'd be writing and then I'd be learning and listening and then writing and learning and listening, because I wanted to figure out what's going on with me. Where are my wounds? And so I'd listen to more podcasts or interviews or webinars, and then I was able to start narrowing it down to, oh, this is what it is, oh, that's what it is. It was like problem solving. And so if you can find a good trauma therapist, I needed a trauma therapist, is really what I needed. I probably still need one, but just to make sense of the things that I haven't sorted out. But absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that people don't really know generally is that trauma is stored in the body, in the central nervous system. And doesn't matter how much working out you do, it's still going to be there because it's in your psyche. And the two are combined, the two work together. And that's another thing people don't realize. Why am I feeling this way? Well, there might be. There might be a physical reason, but there also might be a psychological reason, So it is stored in the body, and by releasing and processing, and there, therapists have a variety of methods to do that. So, well, let's do this. Can you read a poem or two from your book, and then we'll talk about where people can find it?
Yeah, so I want to go to the women section. I think I gave you a couple. So I'm going to read one that I wrote, because when I was going through this I'm going to call it a tsunami for this around this tsunami. um I I fell out of love with everyone. It was weird. It was like I just became almost, I felt dead inside, if you will. And I think that goes along with grief. But I wrote this poem. It's called The Poor. And it said, I stopped loving people so deeply. I had to save my life. I poured so much, so often, so freely, and my love ran dry. My earth cracked, my body collapsed, my mind yielded, and my heart stopped. I grieved, I rested, I learned.
Wow.
And that was probably written after I had some idea of what was going on. That was probably a reflection poem, because some of these are poems are written in the middle of my angst, where others are written after I was had surfaced from, the what would you call it? It's I think I described it this way for several people, where it was like I was treading water in the ocean, and then something just came along and grabbed me by the ankle and pulled me down to the bottom of the ocean, and I couldn't get up. And so I would surface for air only to be pulled back down again and then surfaced and then pulled back down. So the grief was these waves of just angst that I couldn't figure out was going on. And so that poem was written when I had surfaced for air for a longer period of time and been like, oh, I kind of see what's happening here.
Well, it's funny you said that. It's funny you said that as a metaphor, but before you said it, I was thinking it's like drowning. And then you
Yeah.
went into that. It's like drowning. It's like trying to come up for air. Yeah. Wow. That's so deep.
So there's so many in this women's section. It's probably my favorite section, but here's one called The Portal. 10 years ago, I was young. I looked and acted young. I may still be young. I won't really know until I look back. I have recently stepped through a portal. I don't recognize parts of myself, some physical, but mostly the intuitive and lost parts of myself that I have recaptured through these pages. The parts forgotten and rejected along the way. The parts of me that have decided not to take any more meaningless shit from others or myself. My voice is getting louder, and others people's voices are fading in the distance. My soul is unshackling itself. I am shedding, peeling, excavating, and examining like never before. The dark clouds are changing into a magnificent spectrum of colors, like a Florida sunset, and the rain is cleansing me. It's not a baptism, it's a rebirth. The sun is finally breaking through. My young self and new self are getting acquainted. We are certain to experience more battles, but we are becoming fast friends and loyal companions. That got
Oh
me
my
choked
gosh.
up.
I love that. There's so much hope in that, like I feel the darkness and the scariness, and then I see the rainbow. I feel there's hope. And that's really what we're here to do. So the reason I called my podcast My Golden Life is because I always believe there's opportunity for change, for hope, and for creating your own golden life. And I think we all associate golden with shiny, beautiful, valuable, stuff like that. And I think we can all create that. And then some people have to go through this dark night period, but there's hope. You can come out of it and find purpose and meaning in your life in a different way. So to me, your story is a really beautiful story, and I'm so grateful that you shared it and your
Thank you.
poetry. Yeah, thank you. So let's tell everybody where they can find your book, where they can find you. This is Andrea, who is an indie author, and she is a poet, and she goes by the pen name Shydrea. Tell
And
us
you're
about
saying
that,
that right. Yeah.
Shydrea. Well, because it's on your website, it shows you how you pronounce it, or it's on your one sheet
Yeah.
or something like that. But tell people where they can find you and your work.
Yeah, so everything's on my website, and my web address is the same as all my social media accounts as well. So it's so easy. But the name Shydrea is a blend of my name and my daughter's name. And my daughter's name is Cheyenne. I named her after the indigenous or Indian tribe, the Cheyenne Indians. So it's spelled the proper way, Cheyenne. Took the first half of that and blended it with the last half of my name. And I did that years ago, like in 2009. So that's where the name came from. And everything's on my website. I do my books there. It links you to my Etsy store where you can get a signed copy with a bookmark that I ship to you, or you can get it right from Amazon if that's more affordable. And then I also do poems. I write poems for people. So, and I write all kinds of poems, funny poems, angry poems, wedding poems, and I do illustrations. So I love my artwork. I did all my artwork for my book, including the cover and the inside pages. And so I do illustrations for books or websites or passion projects, and I draw them, I sketch them and turn them into digital art. And I might start teaching that someday as well. I don't know. I haven't decided. I love the writing too. So yeah.
I love the transformation that you've been through. I love I love where you are now. I'm going to share a quick little story, and that is, I had early in my yoga training and teaching, I had these two mentors, Jordan and Martin Kirk. And they were Anusara certified yoga teachers, and they traveled the world, and they were amazing yoga teachers. They'd been teaching. I mean, he had a degree in biomechanical engineering. And so
Oh,
he was into the anatomy stuff. And so he was always teaching anatomy classes. And she was just biggest heart. She had the biggest heart, and she was just really a gifted teacher. Well, at some point, they decided to retire from yoga teaching. And I was like, what? You can't. You're too
exactly.
good. You know, you've brought all this to the table. Well, he went back into science. And then she became a fine artist. And
Mm.
this, I had no idea that she had this talent, but she commissions art pieces. She does these beautiful watercolors. And I'm not sure, watercolors, oil, maybe she does both, but she's a phenomenal artist. And I said to her, Jordan, I didn't even know art was a thing for you. And she goes, oh yeah, I majored in that in college. And so while I was sad that she left her yoga teaching career, I was happy that she blossomed into this amazing artist. And now her work is spread all, she's winning awards, and it's really cool.
Oh, wow.
So
So,
yeah.
well, and I never knew I was an artist. And I think we're all creative beings. I believe that creativity is our spiritual, that's the spiritual aspect of us, is to be creative. And so, and this is a quote I have that I've written, that's creativity is your soul calling. And so we all have the right to be creative, and we don't have to aspire to it being perfect or approved by society. My artwork's not perfect, and I'm trying to be less perfect. I want to be messy and human in every kind of way. I don't want to be perfect anymore. I was trying to be perfect my whole life.
Yeah. Yeah, and that has big drawbacks. And so to any perfectionists out there, you know who you
Yeah.
are. I think you know who you are. Some of you might not know. But you're always trying to get it right. You're always trying to make it perfect, you know, from entertaining to, you know, your career and your work. So just know that you have fellow perfectionists out there who have decided that that's not really where it's at. So Andrea, thank you so much for doing this interview, for sharing your story, for in your heart and your voice, and for inspiring other women to find theirs and use theirs as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm so glad we met. I feel a kindred spirit, and I think you have a wonderful platform here. And as your podcast grows, I think you're going to have some awesome topics. So I'm going to keep listening, and I'm going to keep listening to your daughter's podcast when I get a chance. I think I'm up to 4 podcasts a day now. I'm probably going to have a full-time career in just listening to podcasts.
They're amazing. They really are. They're so
Uh-huh.
informative. They make you feel like you're normal. I was listening to
Mhm.
Huberman the other day, and 10% happier. Have you listened to that one? 10%
No.
happier.
Mm-mm.
That's a good one. Anyway, namaste.
Namaste.
And
All right.
I will see you around on Facebook, and we'll just stay connected. I would love to do that.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Thanks, Lisa.
All
Okay.
righty. You
Have a
bet.
good week. Okay.
You
Bye.
too. Bye-bye.